Welcome to this Blue Circular Economy webinar, the 12th in a series delivered by the Centre for Sustainable Design at the Business School at UCA. Today we're focusing on circular design and circular business models for waste fishing gear and end-of-life fishing gear. And the structure of the webinar today will be initially my colleague Richard introducing a bit more on the project itself, Blue Circular Economy. Then I will give a bit of an overview of circular design issues, and then Richard will come back in again to deliver more content on circular business models, and then we will end up with a discussion and questions. And so that's the format of and structure of the webinar. And again, just a very brief introduction before I pass across to Richard. Blue Circular Economy Project is an Interreg project funded by the European Union, covering the NPA region, the sort of Northern Europe. And it's a 3-year project, and we will be finishing next week with our closing conference. So I'll shut up now and I will pass across to Richard, who will give you a bit more details on the project. Thank you. Talk to you later.
In 2018. We began in 2018. And then, unfortunately, the COVID situation started, and then we had to seek for some extension. The project actually it is a follow-up to an earlier project, which was the Circular Ocean project. Circular Ocean project began somewhere in 2015 and ended in 2018. And so naturally, the Blue Circular Economy project followed from that project, and from the 2018 around September, October, and until now. The lead partner in this project is the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU for short. We are the lead partners. We here in the Ålesund campus are actually leading this project. We also have our partners, the Center for Sustainable Design. That is where Martin actually is affiliated to, from the UK. And then we have Western Development Commission, from Ireland. If you could see that from the slides here, I'm sure my pointer is. If only I can use my pointer, if you can see that, you see WDC from Ireland as one of the partners. And then we also have Environmental Research Institute, ERI, of the North Highland College from Scotland as the other partner. And then we also have DTU. DTU is the Danish Technical University. I think the right name is Technical University of Denmark as the 4th partner. And so we have 5 partners in all, with NTNU as the lead partner. The aim of the project actually is to support the development of the fishing net waste industry, especially in the Europe's northern part of this area, and so what we call the periphery regions in the north of Europe. The project actually has been quite successful in terms of developing clusters. We realized that the clusters, especially Norway and Ireland, which we had wanted to develop, which was the aim of the project, was not very matured. The clusters were not very matured. And so the project has been able to help build the cluster of both countries, Norway and Ireland. Like I did mention, our focus has been on helping small and medium-sized enterprises that offer products and services within the fishing gear recycling solutions, especially within the NPA region. And so for the past 3.5 years, we have been helping SMEs within these regions in order to reach greater market height. We've been able to do this through SMEs mentoring, through SMEs engagement workshops, through webinars, through one-to-one interactions, and of course, some research work. We know from current statistics that more than 12.7 million tons of marine plastics waste usually enters the ocean each year due to poor waste management. And there are some statistics that shows that by 2050, there could be more plastics than fish in the world's ocean. That is quite frightening. And to know that, well, very soon, I mean, there might be more plastic in the fish than, I mean, the sea than our source of nutrition being fish in the world ocean. And so in the past few decades, there have been a lot of focus on the environment, a lot of focus on how to manage the marine pollution, a lot of focus on sustainability. And of course, the Brundtland Commission has been very instrumental in this focus, also with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. These bodies have been very, very instrumental in creating awareness and issues of on the environment. So the need to transition from, let's say, a linear economy to a circular economy has become more important than before. So that instead of take, make, and dump, focus is now much more on sharing, on recovery, on product life extensions, on repair, on refurbishment, on remanufacturing, and then recycling. And so prior to the project, we had very little understanding of the clusters in Norway and then in Ireland. And I will later on provide some more information on these clusters. But before then, Martin can come in here.
Thanks, Richard. So what I'm going to really do is just a bit of an introduction around more of the circular design issues before I pass back to Richard. So as we know, there are multiple different types of gear used to catch both finfish and shellfish, both in the open sea and in aquaculture, and the vast majority of these are derived from polypropylene, polyethylene, and nylon. And really, we still have the challenges of many of the nets going to landfill or even incineration, and often ending up in the sea because of very fragmented waste management, infrastructure throughout Europe or even the world. So we see, a lot of challenges with end-of-life waste and also waste in the oceans. And as Richard touched on, a little bit, there's still very poor data on this. One UN study highlighted, fishing gear may be 10% of the total of ocean marine plastics, but another study indicated by weight it may be up to 70%. So there's, a fishing gear is part of ocean marine plastics, but it's still ill-defined in the sea sense. But also, end of life fishing gear and waste fishing gear has been not well documented at a port harbour level. And this is an increasing requirement moving into the reporting requirements linked to the Single-Use Plastics Directive. So what we do see, however, what we found is there is quite extensive repair that goes on between the fishers, by the fishers. And this is actually a slide from Taiwan, where we just myself and my wife came across a beach, and we saw this huge net with the guys repairing this. And One of the issues here, however, is with custom and practice. Different polymers are used often to repair the nets. Now that's not you know, I can see that the fishers will do that because they learn as works well, but obviously it doesn't work so well when it comes to the end of life. So there is, in a sense, product life extension going on by the fishers. What we have is also a pretty immature recycling infrastructure. We have Plastics Global on mechanical recycling and Aquafil on chemical recycling, who produce their Second Life fiber. And there are other players, particularly entering the market, and Richard will touch on one in Norway a little bit later. But there are big challenges when we come to the implementation of the extended producer responsibility in the 1st of January 2025 across all member states. We need sort of robust recycling infrastructure to enable the recycling to happen. So there's a sort of big gap between where we are now and where we're going, and how we fill this, you know, is going to be a key issue. So we do have these recyclers producing pellets, and we have also a number of companies, for example, Fishy Filaments, that are producing filaments from waste gear that then are going to a range of different products. So the recycling infrastructure at the moment is immature. We do have also a number of products being developed using fishing, using pellets from fishing gear. This is the classic Bureo skateboard that's used pellets, because they indeed have changed their business model, where they've now become a materials supplier because they've built up the knowledge and expertise, and they have increasing demand. But there's still relatively few products that are made from pellets or filaments, or indeed are reused in another form. Although the numbers are growing, and a number of organizations that are using EcoNile, it appears to be growing as well. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, in the Single-Use Plastics Directive, embedded within that, we have the extended producer responsibility for waste fishing gear, or waste fishing gear plastic, based on the market. And that is due to come in, you know, back end of December 2024, with a view to, you know, program starting in 2025. So there's sort of changes in legislation out there, and also UK outside, now sadly, my viewpoint, sadly outside the EU, and Norway are also looking at their own policy initiatives, and indeed believe that Canada is also looking similarly at things. Coming out of a webinar that we ran last week, one of the speculations was that if we look at other types of EPR in electronics or automotive, what we saw was that a number of other countries or states in the US waited till Europe had implemented legislation before they took on board EPR. So we may see these sort of eyes watching Europe as to what happens on fishing gear EPR. But essentially another key element was what is different with fishing gear EPR compared to, you know, packaging, electronics and automotive, is it's much more place-based. With electronics or automotive, you know, the car in a sense can come to the end of life anywhere in a country with the packaging. Where, you know, a lot of the activity around the fishing gear is around coastal areas. So essentially, if one's going to sort of start to build up the infrastructure in port cities, harbour areas, one will need to bring together the sort of business and innovation players and the fishing players, the role players, and those. So we need to bring these groups together, and we did this in a couple of workshops we organised, and generally these groups weren't historically talking to one another. So as part of sort of developing the infrastructure to enable the for circularity to function at that level, whether it's repair, refurbishment, recycling, we need to sort of work with our local innovation systems around the sort of where the waste and end-of-life fishing gear emerges. What we also got now is standards emerging. So we have TC 466 within SEN, European standardization, that is sort of 7 topic areas that are being now focused on for standards. Again, to come in 2024. I think there's negotiation going on at the moment is to somewhere between May and December. But essentially, those standards are really looking at recyclability, but importantly, looking at circular design and also circular business models. And looking at other sectors and areas, we can learn some lessons. So what is key in terms of circular design is it's not defined yet in standards. That's the first point. And design and development of is key, because 80% of a product's environmental impact is derived at the design and development stage. And what we find in fishing gear is there is a mix of producers and assemblers. So assemblers essentially will import components, polymers, etc., and assemble them and place them on the market. So there's a big link also to the supply chain as well, and to procurement, and working with the suppliers of the polymers and the other types of polymer and other material components. So the whole area of proactively designing for circularity, or more broadly eco-design, integrating environmental considerations into design and development, is a very new area in this sector. Yes, there are a range of technical requirements that gear developers and designers have to go through, but environmental issues and incorporating those issues into the earliest stages of the design of fishing gear is a new area. One of the areas that we've also identified is a lot of customization of nets. So there is this link between let's say the producer and the fishers. But again, this area is a whole new area. So where this standard comes in is sort of, let's say, cutting new ground. So the idea of sort of designing for modularity or disassembly of nets, proactive design, is new. We see that there is repair going on, despite, from that earlier slide, despite the nets not being designed for ease of disassembly. So therefore, there is, from the research we've done, there's a lot of premium of involving fishers in the disassembly of nets, because quite simply, they're the only ones really that know how to disassemble the nets efficiently. So, however, if the nets were designed for modularity or disassembly in mind, it could, enable more efficient separation of materials and reduce the cost of employing, the fishers or others to disassemble the nets. So very quickly, I'll just go through a few sort of options, particularly for those that design and develop and assemble nets. I'll just pick out a few sort of areas that one might think about if one's looking to make the nets potentially more circular. So in material sourcing, one could look at the whole weight and volume of the net. Does the net, of course, with all of this, the net has to function. It has to perform its function, and it has to do the job. But, the whole part of this is we're looking at how we can reduce the environmental impact. So, weight and volume, are there different materials that could be used? Could renewable materials be used? Etc., etc. Could one even start to, make nets out of recycled polymers? So we have a real closed loop there. one could start, and I'm really focusing, drawing out here the circularity elements rather than the other environmental impact reduction areas. So again, in the when one's looking at manufacturing assembly, could one start to incorporate offcuts in some way from the production process? Could one simplify the design of the nets in some way? So you've got less materials and more perhaps mono materials. Could one also look at the whole area of the transport and distribution of the nets? It's not an area I've looked at, but I'm not quite sure how nets are packaged up before they're delivered to the fishers. Is there something we could do there, to actually reduce the sort of containment of the gear? The use phase is a significant part of the circularity discussion. So could we design the nets, to make more spare parts available, and for the nets to be easier to be maintained and repaired by the fishers? Already there is some, we've seen this area of sort of patching going on. There's various terms for this around the world, when fishers will cut out parts of the net and then replace it with other sections. Now that is done by the fishers. That's not built in by the producers as we see at the moment. So what could be designed in to enable the repair and therefore the product life extension to continue? So also could more fishers start to think about take-back models where they take back the nets, they repair, and then they recenter the customer, maybe even changing and thinking about new business models where we're leasing nets or offering on a service, and Richard will develop this further. So again, if we go through a whole cycle of multiple uses, and when the net does come to its sort of end of life, again, how can it be designed to be, easier for the different components in the net to be separated and reutilized in some form? But obviously the goal of this is to extend the life of the fishing nets, the components and the materials for as long as possible in the system. So we'll make this this checklist available online, and this is really just a rule of thumb of some of the sorts of issues gear designers and assemblers might think about at different sort of stages of the life cycle. So I now pass across to Richard for a little bit of feedback on research and information on the tool.
Okay, thank you, Martin. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the main goals of the BCE project was for us to help develop the two main clusters, that is the Norwegian cluster and then the Irish cluster. Because before the project, we were not having much understanding of what pertains in the cluster. The nature of the cluster was less visible and less known, and it was quite difficult to know what actually exists in the cluster. So the project provided us with the opportunity to kind of study and then understand the workings of the cluster in terms of the nature of the cluster. We see that the Norwegian cluster is less fragmented than the Irish cluster. And we've also been able to map out the various processes in terms of logistics, in terms of production, in terms of marketing that goes on within the cluster. I will focus much more on the Norwegian cluster in the subsequent slides. And so we see that the Norwegian cluster is less fragmented and more developed, more formalized and developed to some extent due to the strong and vibrant aquaculture industry that we have in Norway. So to provide some more simplified view of how this value chain looks like, we will do that through the perspective of NOPREC. NOPREC is a small company, an SME that is located in a small village called Ottosoy. Ottosoy is in the Trøndelag County of Norway. More or less, I would say that is on the north of Trondheim. This village is on the northern part of Trondheim. And the company has a sister company, which is the container service we can see from the slides here. This container service is much more into the waste management and then the transportation part of the value chain. To describe the chain, we see from the left side here that a lot of the raw materials that the company uses comes from the aquaculture industry, the fishing industry, the maritime industry, from the port authorities. A lot of the waste fishing nets, ropes, components, peripherals, all comes from these sectors as the raw material for NOPREC. And then NOPREC recycled these materials mostly into granules or pellets. And these pellets are then supplied to its customers. Its customers are mostly Norwegian customers, though a few also exist in Europe, which is much more international. But most of the customers are actually Norwegian customers. And the notable ones we found out are Plasto, Plastaplast, Oshkoplast, and Plamek. Plasto, for example, is quite a large size company that is involved in the manufacturing of equipment for the aquaculture industry. So they manufacture these aquaculture walkways and then the nets and the plastics that are used in the aquaculture industry. Partner Plus is quite a large, much more larger and global company. I think almost in 5 different parts of the world. They produce different plastic products for the offshore industry and then also for the aquaculture industry. And then Oshkoplast. Oshkoplast is quite a small, medium-sized company that also produces products made from recycled fishing nets. In fact, their products are 98% made from recycled fishing nets and components. And that is very, very surprising. We see that they have a kind of a very unique business model in that almost 100% of the products are made from recycled fishing nets. And so they provide products that are targeting the construction industry. They provide plastic components and the products that are used in reinforcement in the construction industry. And then there is also Plamek. Plamek is also quite a large company that also makes products from plastic, mostly plastic products. And these products have some of the components made from recycled fishing gears. And so these are the companies that are kind of in business relationship with NOPREC. And NOPREC has been very, very dominant and very active in the cluster. Initially, we never had much knowledge about this. And so the BCE project has provided us with much more knowledge about how the cluster operates. Next. And to have a better understanding of the cluster, we kind of conducted a preliminary qualitative research just to find out about the opportunities and the challenges in the cluster. And most of the themes we researched on are based on the business model canvas. We all know that the business model canvas, as we can see here, has to do with key partners, key activities, the value proposition of the company, the types of customer relationships and customer segments, the key resources that have been used in the firm, and the company's channels of distribution, and then of course, how the cost structure relates with the revenue streams. So what we did was to adapt some of the themes we have in the business model canvas to our research context. And so instead of, let's say, key partners, we focused on stakeholders. Stakeholders here are key in the cluster. We also looked at the key activities within the cluster. We looked at the importance of the value proposition from the various SMEs within the cluster, the importance of relationships to them, and then the importance of customer segments and the various resources that they use. And then we also looked at the cost elements. What are the key cost elements that has impact on their revenue streams? Next, Martin. So to give a little bit of background to the context is the Norwegian value chain, and here most of the responses we had were from these SMEs. There were about 10 SMEs. This is quite preliminary. I mean, very, very preliminary. So we could not get much responses from the cluster, but this provided some initial insights, which provide us with the opportunity to conduct much more extensive research later on in the future. And so from the results, we could see here from the results, which as I mentioned, are responses from companies such as Partnerplast, Oshkoplast, Plamek, Noprek, and then these other SMEs. From the responses, we see that most of the respondents gave a very high rating, 5 as the highest in terms of rating, and then 1 in terms of the lowest in terms of importance. And from the graph, we see that more than 70% of the respondents gave or rated very high stakeholders in terms of the fishing and then the aquaculture producers. So fishing and aquaculture producers are key stakeholders within the value chain. And again, if we look down towards the bottom, we also see very high rating for local commune. And so here, local commune authorities are also of much more importance. And then if we also look up at the middle, we see that the rating for social organizations, because beach cleaning associations, NGOs and beach cleaning associations also play very important role in this cluster. But the rating for this was lower compared to what we expected. We also wanted to find out from the respondents what they have been working with in terms of the nets, the hook and line, and then the traps. And almost all these respondents, 100%, mentioned that they work with nets, and half of them are working with hook and lines, and then the other half works with traps. Next, Martin. Then concerning questions on the problems and challenges that they face in the cluster or in the industry. The respondents, more than 70%, mentioned or rated the need for more governmental support as very, very, very important issue. You see that from the orange, you see the orange bar here, which shows more than 70% mentioning this particular factor as key to the sustainability of the chain. More government support is needed. Even from our workshops we had in Olesun and then in Galway, this issue came up very, very strongly that government needs to do much more to support the industry. We also see in terms of agreement with the questions that most of the respondents are working within the recycling industry. Most of them are working within recycling and then reuse as a key solution. Of course, that is not surprising because of the nature of the context. In terms of collaborations, we also see the rating here. Most of them rated this as 4th and about 60% rated our company collaboration with other companies. And so within the cluster, we see a lot of collaboration between the SMEs, as we see from NOPREC, and then the Plasto and Plamec, and the other companies. So there are a lot of collaboration goes on within this cluster. Now, these collaborations are not only even within SMEs and SMEs. We also see collaborations between SMEs and NGOs, which we have studies on. We will later publish that later. A lot of collaboration between SMEs and then NGOs. NGOs collaborate with SMEs to have sources of funding, and then in turn, they also provide cleaning and other recycling services. And then from the graph, we also see that the last one, pricing has been another important issue. You see that rating for pricing here as a problem was given 4, but if you compare 4 or combine 4 and 5, that is very high. That gives you more than 70%. And we all know that the virgin plastics definitely is more cheaper than the recycled plastic granules. So this is another important theme or another important concern that the industry wants us to take a look at. Then in terms of the key resources, we try to find out what are the key resources and then opportunities within the industry. And so we asked the respondents to rate these key factors. And from the graph, you can see also that from the orange bar, more than 70% rated unique value proposition as very important. And from the industry, we saw that the industry actors and partners are providing very, very unique products, very unique resources, very unique services. And this is what makes them much more competitive. In terms of emerging technologies, yes, emerging technologies also stands out as a very key important factor. Most of the companies are making use of high advanced automation systems and robotics in their manufacturing process. We all know that Norway has very high labor costs. And so for these small and medium enterprises to be viable, they make use of automated manufacturing. Even the smallest company, Oshkoplast, makes use of automation throughout its production processes. In terms of use of social media, we see that social media, of course, is very popular now. Social media for business use is also another key important factor. And here, more than 60% indicated that it gave it very high rating of 5, as we can see from the graph. And then lastly, workshops and seminars. Workshops and seminars provide very good forum, as we are having now, for the exchange of ideas. And so this was also rated as very, very important. Next. Then in terms of cost structures, cost we know is very, very, very key factor that influences the industry. And again, we ask the companies to rate all these individual cost types. And here we see that capital investments in terms of setup costs, investments in machinery, investments in equipment, investments in machines that can be used for the molding, for the cleaning, for the recycling. These are very quite expensive. And so cost of machinery or capital investments is more or less the highest rated cost factor. And this is then followed by environmental charges. Some of the communes, some of the local municipalities have charges for the environment, and these companies are asked to kind of pay for that. And so this was rated number 4 as a key important factor that should be considered. In terms of cost related to technology, some of the companies need to acquire technology in terms of the processing. How do you process or recycle the gear? It involves some kind of technology. Some of them are making use of automation systems. That also involves some kind of specialized technology. And then, so they all agree, more than 60% agree that technological cost is a key factor within the industry. And then after that, I think in terms of transportation cost, in terms of marketing cost, in terms of tax, these are equally graded as very important, as we can see again from the graph. Next, Martin. Yes, so then we also asked the respondents to kind of indicate in terms of the impact that the type of customers or the type of business has to do with the revenue streams. And more than 70% agree that B2B is much more viable in terms of revenue for the industry. And that is not surprising because this particular cluster is made up of B2B companies, as we saw from the NOPREC case, providing resources and products and services for the business customers. So B2B seem to be very, very strongly in terms of viability, very strong in terms of viability within the cluster. But surprisingly, some of them also mention B2C, products from sunglasses, from socks, from bracelets, which are made from recycled fishing gear. And so this also shows that there's some possibility to make money, to make a viable business from a B2C industry. But I think that in Norway, the focus is much more B2B. B2B makes much more money or profitability within the cluster than the B2C. Next, Martin. Then again, what we also did was that as part of the study, we wanted to have some insight on existing circular business models that are common in the cluster. The focus actually was much more on the recyclers and then the net manufacturers, but most of the respondents here are not into net manufacturing or recycling. But yet again, they provided us with some insights as to the existing circular business models. We see from the results here that more than 57% actually indicated product life extensions. And so product life extensions here has to do with products or services that are designed, using durable materials like the NEMA, for example, which kind of increases the lifespan of the product. And so 57% agree with that. And this was followed by almost 43%, which also indicated product on demand as another viable existing circular business model. And so here you only produce when your product or services are demanded, and that is good. That is the essence of circular economy, because with the linear, you are producing goods, you are stocking, and then when there's demand, you sell. But in the circular situation, you only produce when there is demand or when your product or services are demanded, and that is much more circular. And so 43% respondents agree to this circular business model. And then this was followed by the third one, which is the product modular design. So a lot of modular production has been done where products are produced in components such that these components can easily be removed, and replaced, or maybe easily removed for recycling. And here again, 29% provide some insight in this type of business model. The least was the facilitated reuse, which we have almost 14.29% agreeing to that. Next, Martin. Then again, we also wanted to have some insight into future business model. Of course, some of these models are already being used, but we feel that using much more of these circular business models is the way forward. And so we wanted to have some insights regarding the industry. And here again, the respondents agreed, about 86% of them agreed that the future is for what? Refurbishment, repair, remanufacturing, and reconditioning. This should be the way forward in terms of a choice for a circular business model. And then this was followed by about 57% agreement that then the next option should be leasing. Leasing products and services should also be another viable circular business model in the future. And this could be within the B2B or the B2C, either business to business context or the business to consumer context. And then that was also followed by almost 29% agreement in terms of incentivized return. So here incentivized return is that the need for companies to provide incentives for both business consumers and then and individual consumers to return products or services that are no more needed, so that these products and services can be recycled. And then lastly, we have the performance-based and then the sharing platform. Sharing is another very popular business model now. Almost 14.3% agree to these types of circular business models. And so in a way, this gave us that kind of overview of some of the possible circular business models that can be used within a cluster and elsewhere if we want to go more circular. Next, Martin. Then again, most of the themes we discussed earlier actually were based on the circular business model perspective. We have provided a template which will be available online, which can be downloaded. And this template actually shows the type of circular business model that a business or entrepreneur or a startup can select, and then the important factors or the important issues that should be focused on if you want to choose a specific circular business model. For example, if you decide to use, let's say, product life extensions as your business model, then a lot of focus should be on designing, designing for what? Longevity. You design products that they have long life. You should use durable materials like the NEMA as the raw materials. You should be able to combine, with other circular business models for additional revenue streams, such as refurbishment, repair, remanufacturing, and then reconditioning. On the other hand, if let's say you want to use leasing as a kind of a business model, then what are the key factors to kind of focus on? Here, you should focus on the fact that you should lease services, leasing it out, or even using services that are leased, and that you should not sell. You don't sell. And the idea is that if you sell, then you are more or less following a linear process. So don't sell, keep ownership, and lease out. Offer consistent high quality services and products when you do your leasing services. And then just to go through one other more, just to reinforce the circular business model, let's take refurbishment, repair, remanufacturing, and recondition. And so if you choose this as a business model, then there are some key issues that you should focus on in order to be able to take advantage of this particular circular business model. Here, much more focus should be on the aesthetic improvement of the product, the components and the materials that are being used for the product in terms of recycling or refurbishment or remanufacturing should be enhanced in order to appeal to your customers, especially if they are consumer products. Provide repair services to a return facility product or components or material back to usable state. And so here the focus is on repairing. A lot of repair work should be done. Bring back used product into satisfactory working condition by rebuilding, by repairing, major components done that are close to what failure, things that are almost going to perish or going to be out of their useful life cycle, you should bring them back to life. And then, of course, you have these other models like sharing platforms, peer-to-peer lending, like recovery of secondary materials. And each of these models or these circular business models have unique features of issues that you should focus in order to take much more advantage of the business model. Thank you. And then we now have time for question and answers. So Martin, can you come in now?
Yeah, maybe if people have any questions, they can sort of unmute themselves, and if we try not to talk over one another, if people have some observations, I mean, just while people are thinking about this, I think just to clarify, I think Richard's survey is very small scale, and I think perhaps some of the results, it's very early stage, I think there, and it's I think there's some elements that would slightly contradictory with some of the things that we're finding. So I think the issues that have come out of that was this sort of need to build the infrastructure and the cost of building the infrastructure, particularly for the recycling. And again, this is from the Norwegian example within a cluster of companies who are looking at the sort of circularity of fishing nets. And they're very much seeing that they need government support to invest in the right sort of infrastructure. So I think those are a couple of sort of key things that are emerging that sort of make sense in the broader picture of, you know, legislation and policy coming in, but very little infrastructure at the moment, you know, value chains building, very immature at the moment. So do we have any comments or thoughts or observations? Did you violently agree with anything we presented? Did you was there any one point that struck you? Any comments?
Any comment or any much more insights or clarification concerning the value chain, concerning activities of NOPREC?
Yeah,
and its associated partners.
Yeah, and anything else you want to share? Because I know there's people with who are working in the area. So, yeah, Willie.
Yeah, I have one question, which I don't think you touched on very much. This is very much to build up successful infrastructure. You need cooperation, sometimes on voluntary basis, and you need to share information with each other. And when it comes to innovations, many small innovators are very often scared to reveal too much about own innovation, so to say. But I think that is needed in this case. So that kind of business risk concerns, is that something you can have solutions to, or can it be facilitated in some way?
I mean, definitely that came out very strongly from the work we've done more on the sort of innovation systems, and that need to engage different stakeholders within sort of local areas, port city areas, and to enable a freer exchange of knowledge and information. But absolutely, you know, there are concerns with some people releasing information. So, I mean, from a very basic point, I think from learning from the workshops we organised in the stakeholder workshops we organised in Galway and Alisund, is in any port city area which either produces nets or nets come to the end of life. If there is going to be legislation and policy coming in to recycle the nets, there's very much a need to pull those stakeholders together, you know, so even local forum to bring the guys from the recycling side, even other sort of entrepreneurs and the fishers together. So I think there's some very basic things about joining people up in the first place.
Yeah, just to add, Martin, so in one of our workshops, the SMEs, some of the SMEs were meeting themselves for the first time at the workshop, you know, and so the workshop provided that forum for them to meet each other and kind of start sharing ideas, start, you know, collaborating and maybe become partners. And we saw later on from the interactions that some of these companies, which initially thought themselves as competitors, are now working together, you know, in a lot of collaboration, ventures and innovations. And so, yes, it's difficult in terms of linking out very, very important competitive information or strategy, but it's possible for collaboration, you know.
And I think one thing that, you know, we had some challenges with, but has also come out very strongly from the work on their local innovation systems is the need to engage the fishers from the beginning. They are the key stakeholders in this. And I think that was an issue we struggled in Alesund. And I think, Richard, you went around and talked to all these fishers, but it's really difficult to get them along. So again, they may be reluctant to join these sorts of stakeholder groups because it might be a sort of new thing for them. But they are obviously key in actually developing any, you know, system. You know, certainly really from the Sotanis system, getting those fishing organizations and the key people involved were very important, as was the example we have of Stevenston Harbour in Canada. So yeah, 100% involve the stakeholders, enable collaboration, but some people still might sit on knowledge. So you have to try and find some way to provide incentives for people to let information flow. But I think there is a big issue I see here in how you build the infrastructure, particularly when the infrastructure is so limited at this moment. And is there a role for government to work with entrepreneurs to facilitate that infrastructure? Do we have any other thoughts or comments? More comments or thoughts?
No, I just want to add, that recently we've been able to connect an SME from Ireland to Norprek. And they required some kind of services, some kind of technical know-how in recycling a specific gear, which was quite difficult for them to recycle. So we were able to connect them, you know, to Norprek, and then they have started talking and they have started working together. And so you will never know. They are, I mean, these forums provide opportunity for networking. And it's possible to collaborate, to network and get access to knowledge and information and technology.
And I think just building on that point is that because we've sort of built some awareness in Alesund and Galway and the west coast of Ireland around the sort of different stages of development, we'd identified even very basic services like specialist services to wash nets were just not available at the right sort of cost. So in terms of producing clean material, even, you know, basic services around washing nets, there will be a need, you know, if we're going to have legislation requiring the cleaning of both the waste nets and the end-of-life nets. So there are also key parts to fill in the value chains. And I think what's interesting about the value chain in Norway, and I think we'd agree, Richard, we've really just scraped the surface on this, is that there was very much more of a focus on this sort of business to business side, as I think has come out in what Richard said. And we hadn't, certainly in the product side of those that have produced the pellets from the nets, Most of what we'd found in terms of commercial products that were being sold were consumer products. But what was interesting about the Norway, and surprising to us at the time when we ran the workshop, is there was already the sales of a recycled polymer pellets into business to business products, and we hadn't really picked that up elsewhere in our surveys as a products on the market. So I don't know if anybody else has any experience of on the call has any experience of the provision of pellets from fishing gear going into business to business products, or even into business to government products. Or it may be quite a unique Norwegian thing at the moment.
Yeah, I think that the Norwegian case is driven much more because of the strong focus on sustainability. And Martin, earlier that Norway had spearheaded a lot of policy formulations. Even the extended producer responsibility, it actually was being spearheaded here in Norway. And so that kind of drive, that kind of focus on sustainability, and then the industry itself, the aquaculture industry, I think that is what is driving the
I think
value chain here.
I think it's something, there's probably something in that Norwegian commitment to sustainability, but also the Norwegian strength in the fishing sector, and probably funding as well. And I'd say one of the things that we found that was quite interesting, comparing, contrasting Norway and Ireland, and Bernard, I see your hand up, just give me a minute, that there was a sort of, although we knew that there had been some proposals for EPR in Norway in the past, it appeared to go very quiet. And even with the producers in the room, there wasn't real great degree of clarity around what the situation was. So there was a sort of feeling that maybe that in a Norwegian context, maybe the big players are keeping their cards close to the chest and maybe in dialogue with government. Whereas in Ireland, there was perhaps, interestingly, more awareness, and that was partly because BIM had organised, which is linked to the Irish government, had organised a stakeholder forum of a variety of about 40 or 50 stakeholders. But so there was sort of perhaps slightly more awareness of what might be coming on the EPR, whereas we sort of knew, that things were happening in Norway, but it was more difficult for people to divulge that, or it was a little bit less clear. Anyway, over to Bernard.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for giving me the floor. Yes, so I can confirm that several products, business to business, have been made on base of fishing gear, as you are certainly aware of, made on several plastic technologies. Basically, all types of technology have been successfully dealt with. I think the biggest accomplishment, which was brought to market last year, was a circular rope with 97% post-consumer recycled content from maritime ropes. So it's not a lack of technology. I do share, that the fact that there is not a talk on EPR at the moment in Norway doesn't mean that it's not being discussed, but it's under the radar. I've had 3 calls today on EPR with 3 member states. And the nightmare which we already envisaged when we last met face-to-face, I think in Brussels, is that we will have 25 or 27 EPR schemes, which will lead to bureaucracy and a complete nightmare, instead of one harmonized scheme all over Europe. So let's wait and see. We see that the member states are very much enthusiastic about the topic, which I think is the good news, but they all want to do it on an island solution, which is very bad news for the environment. So hopefully we can still manage to bring them on, but to reconfirm, so there have been plenty of products brought to market already, up to circular ropes. So it's not a lack of technology anymore. It's a matter of uptake from the market.
And just a question there, Bernard, because I know you'll be very close to this, is that I've seen in other sectors that sometimes if there's like informal networks develop between the individuals who have responsibility in the member states, either it's, you know, Department of Environment, or it may be spread in different member states. But for this issue, they all seem to be operating independently. There is also this huge issue that there's a lack of national producer organizations, i.e. the manufacturers and the assemblers. There just isn't a networks of the national players.
Doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. I mean, you know that we have the European umbrellas, but even there's only a limited number of producers member. So yes, there is a fragmented issue there that I think will be solved. But it will only be solved when we see a harmonized activity on the member state level for a joint harmonized EPR. And otherwise we see 27 scattered things which are bound to fail. But yeah, it's there's still a lot of work to be done. I mean, I think, you know, the deadline is 2025, which means yesterday or tomorrow. We are far from coming to any sensible wordings and propositions so far.
I mean, again, just touching on that former point, is certainly it's not EPR, but I know on in electronics, in the so-called ROS directive, what ended up happening is this informal network between the relevant policy makers, where they got together to share knowledge, share cases. You know, that there was more of a harmonized approach going on. I mean, as you say, you know, the legislation is almost yesterday because it's so close. I mean, unless they get together in these type of networks, it's just going to be this. It's already complex because of lack of data. If they don't start talking to one another, and there is this lack of producer dialogue. It's let's call it mildly, it's going to be a real challenge.
I think we both learned the word diplomatic words, but I think the challenge can be written in capital letters. Yes.
Yeah.
If we take it from today's standpoint. On the other hand, I have to admit that some of the leading rope manufacturers are starting to wake up. It's not too late, but it's getting late. And as you know, it was also discussion during the expert meetings we had in Brussels, meanwhile, almost 3 years ago, time flies, that there is a need to be harmonized on the European continent, because not all producers have activities in all countries, and not all producers are based in Europe. So there are these kind of challenges let's say on top of which makes it completely different from, let's say, a producer of a PET bottle or a car bumper, or because there are many more. So it is complex. And then, of course, what's the role of the producers, which are roughly 10, 15 companies, against the downstream users, which are the net lofts or the others who actually make the nets, which is still open debate as well. But it's yeah, and then the Basel Convention didn't help too much either. So there are plenty of challenges, but there are still good things, and the demand for the material is increasing, and it's going in that respect, it's going in the right direction.
Great. Well, thanks for those comments, Bernard. And do we have any final comments or any final thoughts or anything anybody wants to share? If not, I think. It's thank you all for your attention and attendance, and this is an opportunity to just clarify that this Blue Circular Economy project is in the process of completing, and then we will have a conference at the end of the month where we'll be sharing some more knowledge and experience of this. The recording of this workshop and the ones we did on local innovation systems will be uploaded to the sites within the next sort of week or so, as will the sort of checklists that we produced. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Richard?
Yes, we will make available the checklist online, and so this can be downloaded. And then, of course, we have our closing conference on the 29th.
Yeah.
And so we invite you to join us online. You can join online and participate.
And the last sort of your sort of insight, or whatever the right word is, we've also, within the consortium for this project, are just running a short project looking at waste fishing gear technology and circularity. And if anybody has any information to share on the examples of the use of new technology within that context, please feel free to share it, because that will end up in a report or something somewhere, or presented as an example in a webinar. So if you do have ideas or examples, please feel free to share it. So great. Well, thank you all very much, and have a good rest of the evening, and see you in a webinar or something in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.